A Boeing 747 with 524 people on board. At 24,000 feet, the plane's tail suddenly separates in the air. The flight crew had neither controls left nor direction. In the cabin, there was neither oxygen nor air pressure. But despite that, how did they keep the plane in the air for the next 45 minutes? This is the story of human courage, engineering failure, and a flight in which no kind of control was left. And that flight was Japan Air 123, viewers, on 12th of August 1985. And så är den läst. A Boeing 747 of Japan Airlines was standing at Tokyo's Haneda Airport offboarding passengers. Exactly 1 hour later, it had to take off again and go to Osaka. Thousands of people travel daily from Tokyo to Osaka. But today was an extra busy day. Because for the Japanese holiday season Obon, people were going to their hometowns. After cleaning at Haneda Airport, 509 passengers and 15 crew members boarded Japan Air 123. For the crew, this was a routine flight. But passengers had no idea that the plane they were about to travel in was a victim of an old weakness, a terrifying issue that neither the pilots knew about nor the flight engineer. Due to the busy schedule, this particular Boeing 747 was going to make its sixth flight of the day. Speaking of the three cockpit crew, 49-year-old Captain Masami Takahama was to lead the flight with a total experience of 12,000 hours. First Officer Yutaka Sasaki, 39 years old, was in the process of promotion to captain. And this flight was the most important one for his promotion. His total experience was 3,900 hours. The third cockpit crew member was 46-year-old flight engineer Hiroshi Fukuda, whose job was to sit behind the pilot seats and monitor the technical issues of the plane. Looking at the capability of the cockpit crew, it would not be wrong to say that the lives of 509 passengers were in absolutely safe hands. But was the aircraft as capable as the crew? The answer would be known shortly. At 6:04 p.m., the doors of Japan Air 123 were closed, and the pilot began taxiing the plane to runway 15 left. From Tokyo to Osaka, this was going to be a very short flight. Only 1 hour and 12 minutes, meaning by the time the plane reached its cruising altitude of 24,000 feet, preparations for descent would already have to begin. The weather in Tokyo was perfectly clear. But on this day, several thunderstorms were emerging across Japan. Because of this, the pilot was instructed that instead of going directly to Osaka from Tokyo, he would go over the ocean. Now, on runway 15 left, Japan Air 123 was fully ready for takeoff. At 6:12, after receiving permission from the control tower, the pilot pushed the thrust levers up and successfully took off. Up to this point, everything was completely normal. But exactly 12 minutes after takeoff, over Sagami Bay, a mysterious sound came from inside the plane, and simultaneously a rupture occurred in the very rear tail section. The passengers, who until then were excited with the joy of going home, their excitement turned into fear in the blink of an eye. Because due to the rupture, noise began in the cabin, and loose items quickly started being pulled towards that hole. It all happened so quickly that it was difficult to even guess what had actually happened. The sound was so loud that it was also heard in the cockpit. On the cockpit voice recorder, here it is important to know that as the plane goes to altitude, the air outside becomes thinner, and the oxygen level also decreases. To counter this, artificial pressure is filled inside the cabin, which is almost equal to ground atmospheric pressure. Which means that at 24,000 feet, outside pressure is low, and inside the cabin pressure is higher. And this higher air pressure constantly pushes outward against the cabin walls. The cabin is kept completely airtight, so that this artificial pressure cannot leak. But if even a small part of the cabin is weak, the air pressure can tear that place open and create a rupture, because of which the artificial pressure of the cabin will end and the passenger's health may deteriorate. In addition, due to the low oxygen level, breathing can also become difficult. Something similar happened in Japan, Air 123, but so far the two pilots had no knowledge of it. On the cockpit voice recorder, they were heard talking to each other, sometimes thinking the landing gear doors had broken, sometimes that the sound came from the engine, but the truth was that the very rear part of the fuselage had separated from the plane, and had also taken the rudder with it. Because of the tail section tearing away, the cabin could no longer maintain pressure. But the rudder, which is attached to this tail section, its separation meant that the plane was about to go out of both pilots' control. The rudder's job is to control the yaw movement of the aircraft. When any aircraft turns, this movement is called roll movement. The movement of nose up or nose down is called pitch, while the horizontal movement of the nose left or right is called yaw movement. Simply put, at around 24,000 feet, because of the missing rudder, Japan, Air 123, could neither turn properly nor align itself with the runway while landing. But even more dangerous was that the two pilots had no knowledge that the rudder was gone. The plane was no longer stable as before and began to sway left and right on its own, which the autopilot was not capable of controlling. On the ground below, a person noticed something wrong by looking at the plane's movement and took a photo. In this photo, it was clearly visible that the rudder section was missing from the tail. Before both pilots could understand anything, the cabin crew was heard making an announcement instructing passengers to fasten seatbelts and remain seated. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, the captain sensed something wrong and first set the transponder frequency to 703, which is a universal distress signal, meaning now all control towers would know that Japan Air 123 was in an emergency situation. The captain decided to return and land the plane at Tokyo. But was the plane even capable of doing so? First, he informed the control tower about the emergency situation and requested permission to land back in Tokyo. The control tower gave the captain permission to turn 90 degrees and land in Tokyo. The first officer, who was at the controls, turned the plane to the right at exactly a 40-degree angle, but both pilots were even more horrified to see that the plane's angle was far greater than 40 degrees. At this point, the captain was heard shouting at the first officer to reduce the bank angle. But the angle did not reduce at all. The co-pilot tried again and again, but the plane was not responding to any of his inputs. Meanwhile, the flight engineer told both pilots that the hydraulic pressure was rapidly dropping, and within moments the hydraulic pressure went to 0. That was the point when the 3 cockpit crew members realized that the plane had now gone out of their control. For those who don't know, all the plane's controls, including ailerons for left or right turns, elevators for pitch, flaps for reducing speed, all of these, especially when wind of 1,000 kilometers per hour is hitting during flight, are impossible to move by hand. That's why they are moved with the help of hydraulic pressure. And the tail of Japan Air 123 that broke off had also torn some hydraulic pipes with it. That was the reason the entire hydraulic pressure of the plane was lost, and the cockpit controls became like mere showpieces. At 24,000 feet, Japan Air 123 had already fallen victim to multiple problems. Cabin pressure was lost. Oxygen masks had deployed. Due to loss of hydraulic pressure, its controls had become useless. And most dangerously, passengers and pilots were now experiencing hypoxia due to low pressure. Hypoxia is the condition when, due to low oxygen level in the body, confusion occurs. It becomes difficult to make decisions. Movements slow down, and even a person may become unconscious. Meanwhile, the cabin crew was heard announcing to put on oxygen masks. Now Japan Air 123, through severe roll movement, was terrifying the passengers. The 2 pilots now had only one thing left to control: the engines. The captain tried to use only the engine controls to bring the plane out of roll movement. If the plane had to turn right, then the power of the left side engines had to be increased. And if it had to turn left, then the power of the right side engines had to be increased. Similarly, during roll movement, when the plane banked to the right, only by increasing the right engine's power for a certain time could it be leveled again. Using this method, the pilots managed to get considerable control over the roll movement. Now their mission was only one: to get the plane back to Tokyo Airport for landing as soon as possible. But before that, they had to bring the plane closer to the ground so that cabin pressure could increase. Normally elevators are used for this, but they were useless now due to the loss of hydraulic pressure. Therefore, the captain suggested lowering the landing gear. Landing gear creates extra drag, which can reduce speed, but these landing gears also open with hydraulic pressure. So the captain decided to let the landing gear fall open by its own weight. And luckily, they did open. Now at 6:45, Japan Air 123 made a circle over a city named Otsuki, and its altitude dropped from 24,000 feet to 13,500 feet, which was a big achievement of the pilots. Cabin pressure and oxygen both improved, but danger had not yet passed. From here, they had to turn right towards Tokyo. But turning the plane only through engine controls was creating great difficulty for the pilots. If they increased the thrust of the engines, the nose of the plane would go quite high, causing the speed to decrease. And if the speed decreased too much, the plane could stall and fall to the ground. Unwillingly, now the plane entered the mountainous area of Japan. At low altitude, without controls, turning the plane towards Tokyo looked like an impossible task. At 6:48, the captain was heard telling the first officer, "Turn right. Ahead is a mountain." But perhaps taking such fine turns only with engine controls was not possible. At this time, various alarms were also heard ringing in the cockpit. Unwillingly, the plane had come at only 6,800 feet above the mountain range, far from Tokyo. Just a few minutes later, at 6:54 p.m., the captain's panic was clearly evident in his voice. And finally, 2 minutes later, these kinds of sounds were recorded in the cockpit. The plane of Japan Air, while turning due to low altitude, collided with a mountain. In this accident, only 4 people survived, who were sitting on the left side in the center of the cabin. All the rest of the crew and passengers lost their lives in this horrifying accident. In the investigation, it was found that 7 years earlier, while landing, the tail of this plane had struck the runway. After that, the plane remained grounded for several weeks for repairing, and Boeing's technicians worked on it. In the investigation, it was found that the technicians had installed the splice plate of the tail incorrectly. Investigators calculated and said that this faulty repair could only pressurize the cabin for 11,000 cycles, while Japan Air 123, in this condition, had already completed 12,500 cycles, and coincidentally, on this very day, it could not bear the pressure anymore. After this accident, investigators put 4 different pilots through the same situation in the flight simulator. But all 4 pilots crashed the plane, and no pilot could keep the plane in the air as long as Japan Air 123 remained in the air. This is quite astonishing, because in the simulator, the pilots had 2 very big advantages. First, they already knew what the problem was. And second, they had the peace of mind that their lives would not be lost. Considering these conditions, it would not be wrong to say that both pilots of Japan, Air 123, made extreme efforts to control the plane until the very last moment, and kept it in the air for 45 minutes. Hopefully, you will also fully like and share this video. Thank you very much for your loving comments. See you in the next wonderful video.